Well, hello everyone. Here to show you right here. I'm talking about test scores right here, and I'm sure that most of us are familiar with like most tests, though, and most tests that are given to you within a timely manner. And let's just say that it could be, maybe any sorts of paperwork, such as if it's going to be filling out a financial aid application or just reviewing any sorts of documentation or something like that. But this actually talks about here, talk about for tests though. And I know a lot of times it sure seems that way. That when we speak about tests, though, that you probably want to know too that test a lot of times. That when if you're going to be called to go into an actual test room, and let's just say that for the most part that you're going to be going to a test room, that you're going to ask to use either a number two pencil or just a typical pen. And so a lot of times it's like, yeah, we're not talking about the type of pens like these too much of the time, but we're also talking about the type of pens that are required for you to fill out the application, right? And most of those pens, that the pens that I'm actually talking about, which I think that are referred to like the ones that are known for like which call not even the red ink right here, but that still that but like pens like these right here. And so it sure seems that way that if you're trying to fill out an application or if you're trying to fill out any sorts of form to for any source of testing or anything like that, I'm like, oh yeah, if it's for medical reasons or if it's for educational reasons or something like that. So it sure seems that way that each time when we think about a pencil, a lot of times, does that usually mean something such as ruler, or does that mean just to kind of keep your mind typical thinking balanced or something like that? And so that's why it sure seems that way. That by each time that we think about a test, though, that are you necessarily thinking about is that okay? You go ahead and read the questions and then read go by the certain columns of the test right here. So this right here is just a one piece of paper right here that which I know for sure it talks a lot about the financial aid. You can see this right here that talks about for the financial aid and everything. But still, I'm actually using this as an example right here of for like if it's supposed to be any source of test. And test could also be worded like a different source of storylines, equations, or a lot of times like that, especially if you're getting ready to take a math test a lot of times. But it sure seems that way that when we think about a test a lot of times, that do we really get aggravated about whenever we're going to be asking a question? Like, oh yeah, you're going to be reading the questions, and let's just say that if you take at least take a minute to review those questions. So let's just say if there's a list about maybe up to 5 questions all listed at about right here, right? And most of the time that you're gonna get that to where okay, yeah, I think I know the answer to that. So let's just say that on average, though, that they're gonna say that you have 15 minutes to complete this whole 14 question test right here, like a quiz. And I guess a lot of teachers would say too that that's known as for a quiz. Quizzes are usually between 15 to 25 or so question long and characters, and so that's why it's like if we're gonna be talking about a quiz though, that usually you're gonna be timed whenever it comes to taking care completing the test, right? And so it sure seems that way that when we think about a test a lot of times that a lot of times it seems like that if the answers are right there, but then whenever the clock starts to where you got start filling in the answers, and then that's whenever it seems like that you might it might just slip your mind to where an answer to a question that might just suddenly slip your mind. So that's why it sure seems that way that that the whole part about most tests, though, as we all know, any sorts of exams, though, that it seems like to me though that do you really is it really does it really kind of refresh in your memory just knowing that that whenever you start working a test, though, is to where that, yeah, just to have a full concentration on what you're getting ready to work on a lot of times. And so it sure seems that way. Yeah, it's all about, to me though, it seems like everybody else would say too, that if you know that there's a test coming up, but then let's just say that if you need at least 30 seconds just to be able to answer each question on that test, and a lot of times it sure seems that way, that yeah, if you may have missed one or two answers to a question, and but a lot of times we want to know too that why is it that it's like, yeah, even though if you studied hard enough, now why is it that test scores and everything, well, why is it that it seems like everything's just so totally different compared to whenever you take the test, compared to reading a study guide? And it sure seems that way, that you pretty much need to say that, and like all the other parents would say too, that what do you tell your kids about to where that if you don't do very well on a test, or if anything that you scored well, and but then you missed the first two answers from the second half of the quiz, or of the section B or something like that. And so a lot of times that when we think about a test, a lot of times that it's about testing your knowledge, right? But how often are we really going to think as toward it really that compared to playing a game of bingo, that when we think about taking any sorts of test or quiz, is right, if it's going to be an exam, that what you really are doing is during the game of bingo, though, that you're waiting for those numbers to be called, so that way you can fill the spots, right? But like in a test, though, on a test, that like everybody else would say too, that you just go ahead and try just zoom through all 5 or 10 questions, and within the amount of seconds, and just thinking as to where you go ahead and mark the best answer for what you know. And so it sure seems that way, that when we think about tests, though, a lot of times that do you feel more comfortable with working a test, just knowing that that the way that they're asked, the way these tests are asked right here. So you have right here these this is an example right here of like this is an example, I think, is yeah, for financial aid or something like that. But yeah, I'm just using this right here as as an example right here of like test scores and all. But still, that and I know that like all the other students might even say that whenever you do fill out a test, a lot of times, if you're having to maybe fill in the blanks, and like, yeah, if you do mark a yes or no on an answer, and then if you were to explain the reasons for that or something like that. And so it sure seems that way, that with most test scores, though, it sure seems that way that yeah, that you probably want to know too, that for the most time, that not all of them, of course, payments or anything like that, but still that but it sure seems that way, that when we think about that test scores, a lot of times that that are we thinking necessarily to where that, okay, yeah, if you're going to be timed to be able to complete a test, right? And let's just say that if you miss too many, or if anything, that yeah, that on average, though, that you try to think for at least 10 seconds for what's the best answer to a certain test, right? And to whenever a question is read to you, and then from the time that it takes you to correspond for an answer. And so a lot of times, like everybody else would say too, that yeah, well, really, that seems to be most difficult about a lot of tests, that whenever tests are given to you, then it seems like to me that that you go ahead and read the answer. You read the question, but then you mark an answer. But then as soon as you read it, as soon as you read the question very clearly, then you might just take only 3 seconds to just just jot down the answer, and thinking that that's the best answer for what you know. And so it's like, yeah, so it seems like that a lot of times that it seems like, yeah, well, for the most part, that whenever you time somebody on answering a question, that not only that do you really feel under pressure in answering the question, but then also that really that if you can test to be taken to where for what is highly suggested and maybe the best guess. And and I know that a lot of teachers would say too that you're not supposed to guess what the answer is, and that's not really called thinking. But at the same time, though, that when we're talking about any sorts of tests though that you're thinking about, that number one, that when we do think about a test, a lot of times that you are going to be timed, and that even if you don't, like like everybody else would say too, that if you are taking a test, and let's just say if you weren't finished, if you were trying to, if you were trying to fill in the information on a certain session of the test like this about the size of this right here, and let's just say that if you're trying to write down a reasonable explanation toward why you think that is, or something like that, why do you think this is, and so if you're going to be writing something at about right there, and at 102, that really that you're going to be writing in 102 that like anybody say that we're really. Yeah, that's really called it, writing in a journal, ain't it? Not really testing, but most tests that are given that as we all know that would time you to where that you have up to 25 minutes. Most quizzes, some quizzes that would only give you about maybe 10 seconds. 10 minutes, 10 seconds or so just to be able to review those questions. But at the same time, though, it's like, that whenever you do take a test, though, that it's like, really, that you think that you have memorized everything until, it winds up becoming a challenge for you. And that's why it sure seems that way, that the way I think about it, too, that, we're most tests designed toward that just to kind of give you the typical knowledge and thinking, or like everybody else would say, too, that the tests were designed to also trick you in thinking as to where, this is what we talked about, that this is what we've been talking about for the past 6 weeks or something like that. So it sure seems that way, that like everybody else would say too, that we've all have our experience with taking an exam. But let's just say that that with one of these tests right here, to where that if you were trying to write down an answer to a question to where I ask you to please explain why you marked your answer right here on the bottom or something like that. So it's like, when we think about that, most tests that are given, that most multiple choice questions, and let's just say if you follow the S and then a T and then a U or something like that for a certain answer, and so that's why it sure seems that way, that when we are given a test of some sort, that you want to know too, that hey, that whenever you do read the question, and let's just say that if you are very familiar with what the correct answer could be, and let's just say that there's a spot on that test that's going to ask you that please explain why you think that is, and so that's why. It sure seems that way, that whenever you do take a test, that you're likely want to know too, that hey, that whenever you're going to be working a test though, and let's just say that if you need at least 20 seconds longer just to be able to write down what's on your mind about your feedback, and a lot of times like teachers would say too, that that's not really acceptable just to write down your feedback about why do you think that is, and like anybody say that this is a test, it's not a survey. This is a quiz, not a survey. So a lot of times, it sure seems that way, that if you are asked to complete a survey, then for sure that they're going to be asking you to wear any comments and suggestions and quotes and or anything like that that you want to include. Anything about the feedback goes, but like everybody else would say too, that really, that whenever you're going to be taking a quiz, a lot of times, it sure seems that way, that if you practice enough to where that you want to at least get a better score than compared to last time. But let's just say that if somebody were to say that really, if you put enough hard work and effort into trying to pass something, or at least to try to work out the arrangements, and what are the chances of you not having to take the test, period. So let's just say that if everybody were to answer that question to where if you did wind up putting in quite a bit more work and effort into a task than maybe what was originally required. Do you think that maybe if you were told that you don't have to take the test, if you've already done those first two steps for what was required? So a lot of times, like everybody else would say too, that really you would really only want to take a test if it's required. But let's just say if it was optional, and let's just say, like everybody else would say too, that if a test is optional, why would you want to go through all these steps into filling out the application? And of course, that whenever the time starts to where you start taking the test and all that. And let's just say that if it is financial aid paperwork that like anybody say that read this right here to where would you like to receive additional information about educational financial aid? So you got the the information right here that's in regards to financial aid right here, and I guess to say this is the old it's an old application, by the way, from, and I know most of it is online now, but still that it seems like to me though that when we think about a test a lot of times that we talking about is to where they compare the multiple choice questions and compared to those fill in the spots, that fill in the boxes questions or something like that, anything like that. And you're want to know too that yeah, well, first of all, it's like if you're having to, I'm like, yeah, some test, if I can remember right, I'm like, yeah, for what. I'm like, yeah, the fill in a spot, I guess I can just use it. And like, there's different wordings of how you describe test, but the ones where you actually fill in the answers, and it's like, yeah, that most of those tests, which I think, some teachers, they give you up to 30 minutes. They give you up to 30 minutes, half an hour, just to be able to complete the test, right? And but still, on the average, though, that when we do think about tests a lot of times, that it's like, yeah, well, really, that if you're trying to work a test, and let's just say, though, that like everybody else would say, too, that, yeah, well, really, that if you were in the middle of trying to fill in the answers to maybe one or two questions that are left, and let's just say that if you still had 3 minutes left on the timer, and let's just say that somebody were to tell you that, I interrupt you in your test time, just because it's so likely anybody say too that if you're trying to finish up a test, and people are saying this to where, yeah, well, you don't have to worry about it now, so it's like, yeah, after you were first filling out those first two answers to the first two questions, and let's just say if you had 4 questions left that you were trying to concentrate on and trying to answer, right? And you're probably thinking too that, yeah, well, really, that if you're trying to tackle a lot of those questions a lot of times, and like everybody else would say too, that whenever the clock starts, and a lot of times it's like, yeah, you actually see that there's 4 minutes remaining on the clock, but then at the same time, like I say, that you're trying to tackle, those 4 remaining questions left, and like everybody else would say too, that, yeah, well, really, that if you're trying to fill out the test on an electronic application, for the most time, that the most part, that would have it toward that, yeah, well, really, that at the window, like, yeah, if it closes, or if anything, that if you were working on a test, and then they'll tell you that, yeah, well, you don't even have to retake the test, because I'm like, so yeah. So just for practice reasons or something like that, but like, how many of us have ever thought about that to where that while you're taking a test, though, that do you really look at any sorts of opportunities to where that from what was required at the beginning to where what's really optional? So let's just say, on average, though, that you really, though, that are tests are most tests given to you just for the fun and games? And like everybody else would say too, that they're not really meant to be about the fun and games. They're really meant to be about as to the testing your knowledge about what like, yeah, the company or schools, what they were talking about, and the things from what you can remember about the results and everything. But so it's like, yeah, whenever we're talking about a lot of tests, a lot of times, it sure seems that way, that that there's going to be a bonus round, for extra points or something like that if you guess an answer to that question correctly or something like that. So I know that if we're playing a typical mind game here, to where that if you answer this correctly, then you earn the bonus round or something like that. And so I know, like everybody say, that's like a pop quiz, to where it's like a little bit like a mind teaser. And so it's like if like tests could be about anything really, but still. On the other hand, that we're also talking about is to where that if you're trying to do the best you can on a test, and let's just say that if you have 4 minutes remaining on a timer, and you're trying to get to maybe 4 or 5 other questions a little bit sooner, and then let's just say that people I say is to where, well, really that really that whenever the test does close, and then but like everybody else would say too, that have you had those moments to where that while you were working on a test and find out that you were not able to finish up those 2 or 4 other questions on the column there. And so a lot of times it sure seems that way, that that's another way of saying to where okay, that usually means that the time was the time had expired, or if anything, that there was any technical problems or anything like that. But like everybody else would say too, if you do very well on a test from the first half of the quiz, and then chances are that like everybody else would say too, that if you finish up answering the first half of the quiz right here, and like everybody else would say too, that first of all, that whenever you're going to be taking a test, that they're going to ask you to concentrate on a test, and no wandering eyes or no typical thinking. Just give it the best the best of your knowledge whenever it comes to taking a test, right? So a lot of times it sure seems that way. That when we talk about tests, a lot of times that you'll want to know too that hey, whenever you think about a test, a lot of times that are you really focused mainly on getting a good score, and then just giving it your best? I'm like, giving it a lot of energy, and a lot of times do teachers necessarily think about that, toward how much energy and how much hard work and effort that you're willing to give to a test? And let's just say that a lot of it has to do with speed, and I think a lot of it has to do with speed, by the way. And everybody else might even say too that well, really, people can tell that just by is like to where that if you can see people are doing that, when somebody's doing that right there, and like they're able to see that you're able to jot down, okay, the reason why, okay, you go ahead and read the questionnaire, mark your answer right there, okay, fill that out. Okay, mark your answers right there. And okay, mark that. And so it's like, a lot of it seems like it has to do with the speed. So I guess, like anybody say too, that, I'm sure we all look forward to a bonus round, really. I'm like, just for extra credit or something like that. But let's just say that if we were talking about a test to where that if you were focused on getting a good score, right? But let's just say though that what are the chances that, like everybody else would say too, the chances of you having a little bit more time to fill out, to answer a question on a test though, and let's just say that whenever the time starts though, a lot of times it's like when like everybody else would say too, that most teachers ask you to hold your testing pen right here, at least 2 inches away from the test board, and then whenever the clock starts, that you would go ahead and start filling in the answers, right? And so after the clock starts, and then it goes by saying this, to where you go ahead and start at the very top, and then you start marking your answers like that and fill that out. And so a lot of times it's like, after you get through the first half of the test, and let's just say that if you were still working after you had maybe 5 minutes left, just to be able to review the question and mark your answer, and then that's whenever that it's like, well, yep, pencils down. So it's like, yeah. So a lot of times, I'm sure we've all had our experience over something like that, but at the same time, no, it's like you want to know too that if there is a time to where that you do not have to retake the test just because that yeah, we received a letter from your doctor, and you have been excused from having to retake the exam, and then so far as the test score. So I guess a lot of times it seems like that really, if that's really something to be proud of, to where that whenever we think about a test, a lot of times, so that the first thing that we think about, and we try to think about that almost, I try to think about that all the time. It's not really about the fact about if it's a pass or a fail, right? But it's also about how much hard work that you're willing to correspond to where yeah, about your speed, and also about yeah, can you really read your hard work and effort that you put into a test. And like everybody else would say too, that whenever you first start learning the basics about taking a test a lot of times and filling out those applications, it seems like to me though that yeah, to me, like everybody else would say too, that I don't even know what all this means right here, but like anybody say that if you're really new to the topic a lot of times, and it sure seems that way, that yeah, you had no clue on how to answer that or anything, but still. But whenever it comes to taking a test, though, that it sure seems that way. That you are we necessarily thinking about to where that with tests, though, that whenever it comes to studying the objective toward it, about how fast you are into filling in the answers, but then also that if you're getting ready to take a test, that you'll probably want to know too that what's one thing that you really look forward to whenever it comes to taking a test. Well, like everybody else would say too, well, really, most of the time it's a bonus round, but it sure seems that way. That yeah, well, really, that a lot of things that you've been working hard at, and let's just say that if you've been waiting a long time just to provide a little bit more of your feedback, and you want to go and just write something, a little quick memo or something like that on the bottom or something like that. But everybody else would say too that really you would really only want to do that if you're filling out a survey. If you're filling out a survey, then that's really what that's for right there. You don't really want to put that on a test. Like everybody else would say too, that yeah, the teachers might even mark it wrong if you go ahead and write in a memo of your opinion about something. So like everybody else would say too, that if you're going to be taking a test or a quiz, that you just want to concentrate mainly on the subject, the topics, from that test. So a lot of times it sure seems that way. That whenever we do take a test, a lot of times it's like, yeah, you had 2 questions left on that test that you were trying to answer, but then it's like, yeah, that you had you still had 3 minutes left. So it's like, yeah, so it sure seems that way, that just because there are 25 questions altogether on that test, that don't mean that you had to answer all of them. So let's just say that on average, though, that people might say that you only have to answer these questions correctly right here. So let's just say if it's A, B, C, D, right here, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and so it's like, yeah, N, O, P, or do you want to go ahead and just start with L or K? So all you gotta do, let's just say that if all you had to do was just answer the questions in that column correctly, and then you don't even have to worry about. I'm like, yeah. So like everybody else would say too, that whenever you do start taking a test, it seems like a lot of times that you are kind of prepared to take the test, and like everybody else would say too, that try not to make it harder than what it really is, right? And so it's like, yeah, if you answer those 4, I'm like, yeah, how many of that? How many? I counted about 10. So if you're able to answer at least 10 questions from the test correctly, then yeah, then they'll tell you that, yeah, well, does that mean that they're willing to increase the score a little higher to where there are prizes available? So it sure seems